A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
I was looking at a chart the other day that showed the total value of all the gold ever mined in human history, and it is remarkably small. You could basically fit it into 3 or 4 large Olympic-sized swimming pools. Yet, here we are in March of 2026, and it is still the ultimate psychological anchor for the global financial system. Today's prompt from Daniel is about this very thing. He wants to know if people still actually use gold bullion to store money, how you even buy the stuff, and where on earth you keep it without constantly worrying about someone kicking in your door.
It is a classic question because gold occupies this strange middle ground between a high-tech financial asset and a heavy yellow rock. I am Herman Poppleberry, by the way. To answer Daniel's first point, yes, people absolutely still use bullion. In fact, over the last 2 years, we have seen a massive move away from what we call paper gold toward physical possession. People are becoming increasingly wary of counterparty risk. They do not just want a digital line item in a brokerage account that says they own gold, they want the actual atoms.
Which is a bit of a paradox, right? We live in the most digital age in history, and yet there is this growing urge to hold something that has been pulled out of a hole in the ground. I think for a lot of people the term bullion itself feels a bit like something out of a heist movie. Are we talking about those massive bars with the rounded edges, or is it something more accessible for someone who is not a central banker?
That is an important distinction to make right at the start. When people say bullion, they are generally talking about investment-grade gold that is at least 99.5% pure. For the average investor, this usually takes the form of coins or small bars. You have the 1-ounce coins like the American Eagle or the South African Krugerrand, which are very liquid and easy to recognize. Then you have the bars, which can range from 1 gram all the way up to the big boys, the 400 troy-ounce good delivery bars that you see in the basement of the Federal Reserve.
I assume Daniel is probably not looking to buy a 12-kilogram bar of gold just yet, although knowing him, I would not rule it out. But let us talk about the acquisition pipeline. If I decide I want to turn some of my cash into physical gold today, what is the actual mechanism? I cannot imagine I just walk into a bank and ask for a few bars.
You actually used to be able to do that in many countries, but today it is mostly handled through a network of authorized dealers. The process starts at the mints. You have the big sovereign players like the United States Mint, the Royal Mint in the United Kingdom, and the Perth Mint in Australia. These institutions refine the gold and strike the coins or pour the bars. From there, they sell in bulk to a handful of authorized purchasers who then distribute them to retail dealers.
And I am guessing those dealers are not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. There has to be a significant markup.
There is, and that is called the spread. This is the first hurdle Daniel needs to understand. When you buy physical gold, you are almost always paying a premium over the spot price, which is the current market price for raw gold on the global exchanges. For a 1-ounce coin, you might pay 3 to 5% over spot. For smaller fractional bars, like a 10-gram bar, that premium can spike to 10% or more because the manufacturing and distribution costs are a larger share of the total value.
So you are already down 5 to 10% the moment you walk out the door. That seems like a tough pill to swallow compared to just buying an exchange-traded fund where the fees are negligible. Why would someone accept that loss immediately?
Because with an exchange-traded fund, you do not own gold. You own a share in a trust that holds gold, or in some cases, a share in a trust that holds derivatives of gold. If there is a systemic failure in the banking system or a major geopolitical crisis, that digital claim might be difficult to exercise. Physical bullion has zero counterparty risk. It does not require a functioning internet or a solvent brokerage to exist. That is the insurance premium you are paying for with that spread.
That makes sense from a hedging perspective, but let us get into the technical side of the purchase. If I am buying a bar from a dealer, how do I know it is actually gold? We have all heard the stories about tungsten-filled bars. Tungsten has almost the exact same density as gold, so a fake bar can weigh the right amount and still be 90% worthless metal.
That is the nightmare scenario for any stacker. Professional dealers use a few different layers of verification. The gold standard, pun intended, is X-ray fluorescence, or XRF. This is a handheld device that shoots X-rays at the metal and analyzes the secondary X-rays emitted to determine the exact elemental composition of the surface. It can tell you within seconds if a coin is 22 karat or 24 karat.
But XRF only sees the surface, right? If I have a thick gold plating over a tungsten core, the X-ray is just going to see the gold on the outside.
You are thinking like a professional counterfeiter, Corn. To get around that, dealers use ultrasonic thickness testing. Sound waves travel through gold at a specific speed. If there is a different metal inside, the sound wave will reflect or change speed at the boundary where the two metals meet. There is also something called a sigma metalytics verifier, which uses electromagnetic waves to check the conductivity of the entire piece, all the way through the core. If Daniel is buying from a reputable London Bullion Market Association accredited dealer, they are doing these tests on every piece they buy and sell.
It sounds like the barrier to entry is really about trust and verification. But let us move to the second part of Daniel's question, which is arguably the most stressful part: storage. Once you have these shiny, heavy objects, where do they go? If you put them in a home safe, you are basically creating a high-value target for anyone with a crowbar and a bit of information.
The home storage versus professional vaulting debate is the central tension in the gold world. If you keep it at home, you have the ultimate accessibility, but you also have the ultimate risk. Most high net worth individuals have moved toward what we call allocated or segregated storage in private, high security vaults. This is something we touched on back in episode 1421, when we talked about the decline of traditional bank safe deposit boxes.
Right, because banks are actually getting out of the safe deposit box business. They do not want the liability, and the technology is often decades old. These new private bunkers are a completely different animal.
They really are. When you use a private vaulting service, you want to make sure you are getting allocated storage. This means there is a specific bar or coin with a serial number that belongs to you and only you. It is not just a general claim on a pile of gold in the corner. Segregated storage goes a step further, where your gold is physically separated from everyone else's gold in its own locked container.
And this brings up the chain of custody issue, which I find fascinating. If I take my gold home and keep it under my floorboards for 5 years, and then I try to sell it back to a dealer, they are going to treat it as dirty gold, right? They have to re-verify everything, and they might charge me a massive assay fee.
That is a huge hidden cost. If the gold never leaves the professional vault system, it stays within the chain of integrity. The vaulting company can verify to a future buyer that the gold has been under armed guard and constant surveillance since it arrived from the mint. The moment you take it home, that chain is broken. Even if it is a perfect, genuine bar, the next buyer has to assume you might have tampered with it. This is why many people who buy gold as a serious financial move never actually touch it. They buy it through a platform that handles the purchase, the insurance, and the storage in a secure facility.
It feels a bit like the paper gold problem we started with, though. If I never touch the gold, how is it different from a digital entry?
The difference is the legal structure. In an unallocated account, you are an unsecured creditor of the bank. If the bank goes bust, your gold is just part of the general pool of assets. In an allocated private vaulting arrangement, you hold the title to the physical property. The vaulting company is just a bailee. They are looking after your property, but they do not own it. Even if the company fails, that gold is still yours and cannot be seized by their creditors.
It is like the difference between having a balance in a bank account versus having a suitcase in a locker. But there is a logistical nightmare here that I think people overlook, and that is liquidity. If I have $20,000 in a stock, I can click a button and have that cash in my bank account in a few days. If I have $20,000 in gold bars in a vault in Switzerland or Singapore, how do I actually turn that back into spending money in an emergency?
This is where the logistics get heavy. If your gold is in a reputable vaulting system, many of them offer an internal marketplace. You can sell your allocated ounces to another user on the platform, and the title transfers instantly while the gold stays in the same room. But if you have the physical gold at home, you have to find a local dealer, transport the metal securely, wait for them to assay it, and then negotiate a price that will likely be several percentage points below the current spot price.
It sounds like gold is the ultimate slow money. It is not something you use for your monthly expenses. It is the wealth you want to have left over when everything else has gone sideways. It reminds me of our discussion in episode 1426 about oil derivatives. In that market, the vast majority of the trade is just paper barrels moving around. Hardly anyone actually wants the physical crude oil delivered to their front door, because the logistics of handling it are so punishing. Gold is similar, but because it is so valuable by weight, individuals can actually participate in the physical side if they are willing to deal with the friction.
That is a great comparison. The physical reality of gold is that it is incredibly dense. A standard 400-ounce bar is about the size of a loaf of bread, but it weighs nearly 13 kilograms. If you had $1 million worth of gold, you could fit it into a small backpack, but that backpack would weigh about 18 kilograms. It is portable, but only to a point.
I want to go back to the verification for a second. You mentioned tungsten, but are there other ways people try to game the system? I have heard about salted bars where they drill out the center of a genuine bar and fill it with something else.
That is exactly why the ultrasonic testing is so critical. A surface test like XRF will show pure gold, but the ultrasonic waves will hit that internal cavity and bounce back. There is also the old-school Archimedes test, where you measure the displacement of water to find the exact volume and then compare it to the weight. Gold is 19.3 times as dense as water. Almost nothing else comes close except for tungsten and some platinum group metals. If the density is off even by a fraction of a percent, the bar is a fake.
So for Daniel, the takeaway seems to be that if you want to do this, you have to be prepared for the technical overhead. It is not a casual hobby. You need to understand the LBMA Good Delivery List, which is essentially the white list of refiners that the global market trusts. If your bar is not from an LBMA refiner, you are going to have a much harder time selling it later.
The LBMA is the gatekeeper of the global gold trade. They set the standards for everything from the purity of the metal to the ethical sourcing of the ore. When a refiner is on that list, their bars are accepted globally without question. If Daniel buys a bar from a local, unlisted mint because it was slightly cheaper, he might find that no major dealer will buy it back from him without a very expensive and destructive assay process.
It is the ultimate example of why the cheapest option is often the most expensive in the long run. Now, let us talk about the role of gold in 2026 specifically. We have seen a lot of central bank activity lately, especially from countries like China, India, and even some of the smaller European nations. They are buying gold at rates we have not seen in decades. Does that change the math for a private individual?
It provides a floor for the market. When central banks are buying, they are essentially signaling that they do not trust the long-term stability of the reserve currencies they hold. That macro environment makes physical gold more attractive to individuals who share that skepticism. But you have to be careful not to let the narrative overwhelm the math. Gold has a 0% yield. It does not pay dividends, it does not earn interest, and in fact, it costs you money every year to store and insure it.
This is what I call the 10% rule. Most of the sensible analysts I follow suggest that physical gold should probably never be more than 5 to 10% of a portfolio. It is the fire extinguisher. You hope you never have to use it, and you recognize that it is taking up space and costing you a bit of maintenance, but you are glad it is there if the kitchen catches fire.
That is the right way to view it. And to Daniel's question of where to store it, if you are going above that 10%, or if you are dealing with significant amounts of wealth, home storage is just not rational. The security requirements for a truly safe home setup are more than most people are willing to live with. You are talking about reinforced flooring to handle the weight of a high-grade safe, alarm systems with cellular backup, and the constant psychological burden of knowing that your wealth is physically present in your living space.
Not to mention the insurance premiums. Most standard homeowners insurance policies have a very low limit for precious metals, usually around $1,500 or $2,500. If you want to insure $100,000 worth of gold at home, your premium is going to be astronomical because the risk of theft is so high.
Whereas in a professional vault, the insurance is bundled into the storage fee. Because they have 24/7 armed guards, biometric access, and seismic sensors, the insurance companies can offer them much lower rates, which they pass on to the customer. It usually ends up being around 0.5% to 1% of the value of the gold per year.
So for Daniel, if he is looking to get into this, the path seems to be find an LBMA accredited dealer, buy recognized sovereign coins or bars from major mints, and then immediately move them into an allocated third-party vaulting service. It takes the fun out of having a pirate chest in the basement, but it makes it a viable financial strategy.
It turns it into a serious asset class rather than a hobby. And there is one more technical detail I should mention regarding the bars themselves. There is a difference between cast bars and minted bars. Cast bars are made by pouring molten gold into a mold. They have a slightly more rugged, natural look. Minted bars are punched out of a flat strip of gold and then struck with a die, so they look very clean and precise, often coming in a sealed assay card. Minted bars usually carry a slightly higher premium because of that extra processing and the security of the packaging.
I actually prefer the look of the cast bars. They feel more like real money. But the assay card on the minted bars is a nice peace of mind for a retail buyer. It is like a certificate of authenticity that is hard to tamper with.
It is, but you still have to verify the bar inside the card. Counterfeiters have become very good at faking the plastic assay cards. This is why we keep coming back to the dealer's reputation. You are not just buying gold, you are buying the dealer's verification process.
It is a fascinating world because it is so ancient, and yet it is constantly adapting to new technology. We have these high-tech X-ray scanners being used to verify a metal that was likely mined 1,000 years ago and has been melted down and recast a dozen times since then.
That is the beauty of it. Every atom of gold ever mined is still here. It is the ultimate recycled asset. When you hold a gold coin, you could be holding atoms that were once part of a Roman aureus or an Aztec ornament. It is the only financial asset that truly has a multi-millennial track record.
Which brings up an interesting point of comparison. A lot of people in our circle compare gold bullion to Bitcoin and hardware wallets, which we took a deep dive into back in episode 1027. They both claim to be decentralized, permissionless stores of value, but the failure modes are so different. If I lose the private keys to my hardware wallet, that wealth is gone forever. If I lose the key to my physical vault, the gold is still there. I just have a very expensive locksmithing problem.
That is a fundamental distinction. Gold has physical persistence. It does not rely on a network protocol or the survival of a specific cryptographic algorithm. On the flip side, you cannot send a gold bar across the world in 10 seconds for a $5 fee. They solve different problems. Gold is for generational wealth preservation against systemic collapse. Digital assets are for sovereign, portable wealth in a connected world.
I think the most important takeaway for anyone listening, including Daniel, is that physical gold is not an investment in the traditional sense. It is not going to grow a company or invent a new technology. It is a bet against the entropy of human institutions. If you go into it expecting to get rich quick, you are going to be disappointed by the premiums and the storage costs. But if you go into it wanting to know that a portion of your wealth is beyond the reach of any single government or bank, then the mechanics of bullion are well worth understanding.
Well said. It is the original cold storage. Before there were silicon chips and private keys, there was the yellow metal that does not tarnish and cannot be printed. As long as human beings value physical scarcity, gold bullion is going to have a place in the world.
I think we have given Daniel plenty to chew on there. It is a lot more complex than just buying a shiny rock and hiding it under the mattress. You have to think about the LBMA, the spread, the chain of custody, and the legal difference between allocated and unallocated storage.
It is a deep rabbit hole, but for those who value that specific kind of security, there is nothing else like it.
Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes, and a big thanks to Myrtle for providing the GPU credits that power the AI research and generation for this show.
If you found this deep dive into the yellow metal useful, we would love it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app. It really helps the show grow and lets us know what topics you want us to tackle next.
You can find all our past episodes, including the ones we mentioned today about bunkers and hardware wallets, at myweirdprompts.com. This has been My Weird Prompts.
Until next time.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my